Good morning, everybody. My name is Doug Mashek. I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota, and I am pleased to be with you today to talk about some new mechanisms through which olive oil promotes health. And before I begin, I would just like to thank the organizers for this great opportunity. So when we think about disease and in general, we often think of diseases as an individual entity. So what I mean by this, if we compare individual diseases as a branch of a tree, okay? And if we get a particular disease, such as heart disease, we treat that local little branch. So we see a specialist, a doctor, that is a cardiologist that treats specifically that disease. If we get cancer, okay, being another branch of a tree, we see a specialist that treats the cancer. But what we're beginning to realize is that many of these diseases have common risk factors and common roots to those diseases. For example, we know that obesity increases the risk for many of the diseases. And we know that various things that we can and can't control, such as genetics, how much we exercise, our diet, etc., all contribute to the development of these diseases. But the one thing that we often forget and is underappreciated is that almost all of the diseases we face as a society are aging-related diseases. In other words, as we get older, the chance of these diseases increases. And so there's a lot of push in the scientific community right now of trying to understand what are the common aging-related roots of all these diseases, and can we slow the aging process down as a means to treat diseases as a collective. So if we think about getting older and living a long, healthy life, how do we do that? And perhaps the most visually apparent mechanism behind this is this particular study here. And what we see are two monkeys here. And you may look at these and say, oh, this monkey looks pretty old and this monkey looks pretty young. Actually, these monkeys are the exact same age. The difference between these two is this monkey on the right ate 30% fewer calories as an adult than this monkey on the left. In other words, this monkey was calorie restricted, okay? Not starved, but limited calories. And we know from many, many, many studies that limiting calories appears to be the one true mechanism which can increase how long we live and increase how healthy we live. Now, one of the questions is it limiting calories or is it actually fasting? Because when you limit calories, you typically put your body in a state of fasting where you're not eating for a while. And while studies clearly point out to pure calorie restriction as being beneficial, more and more work is showing that it actually might be fasting, which is even more beneficial. And this is important because if we think about society today, we're constantly in a fed state, right? We're almost never fasting. We have food around us at all times. And maybe this is part of the reason we see the development of so many diseases going up in our current society. So this concept of fasting has not been around, or the benefits of fasting has been known for quite some time. You know, there's quotes from Gandhi, from the Swiss physician Paracelsus, talking about fasting being the physician within. And you know, not to leave out some great Greek philosophers too, talking about how fasting is really a way of improving physical, mental efficiency and being used as medicine. So in addition to when we're eating and how much we're eating, it's also what we eat is important, okay? And when it comes to diets, of course, as all of you well know, the Mediterranean diet is really the gold standard as far as preventing diseases and maintaining health throughout life. Okay, and there's lots of components, of course, clearly to this diet, but the one that has gotten a lot of attention is the red wine. And part of this attention is due to the fact that it was discovered quite some time ago that red wine contains this compound called resveratrol. So resveratrol is a little molecule that is enriched in grapes and several other foods, but it's very high concentrations of red wine. And since its discovery, there's been a lot of studies, a lot of magazines and books written, all sorts of things talking about the health benefits of resveratrol and red wine. Now, the way resveratrol works is it turns on a specific pathway in your cells called the sirtuin pathway. And it's not that important that you understand this pathway, but this pathway is also known to be regulated by energy. And so when we have a low energy state, which you would when you're fasting or caloric restriction, it turns on this pathway, okay? And what this pathway does is it improves our metabolism, and it makes us become more resistant to stresses, and it helps us, it makes the cells in our body repair themselves easier, and it really just makes us more youthful, okay? And ultimately, all of these things lead to an increase in lifespan and reduce aging-related diseases. So this pathway is particularly important in mediating the effects of resveratrol and the fasting and calorie restriction that I talked about. Now, the problem is that the doses of resveratrol, while still high, are not adequate to actually turn on this pathway under normal conditions. And you would need about this much red wine per day to actually get the amount of resveratrol you need to turn on this pathway. Okay, many people see this as a problem. I see it more of a challenge. And given the last year of being stuck at home and living through a pandemic, I think people's consumption of red wine has definitely increased. But I think we're all in agreement that it hasn't increased to the point where we're getting the amount of resveratrol that many people think we need. Nonetheless, you can buy resveratrol as a supplement and take it, which has become quite popular. So my lab is really interested in is how we metabolize fat and why why fat is good or bad for us. And if we look at an obese individual here, we can see all this white stuff is adipose tissue. That's fat tissue, okay? And that's really what defines obesity. And if we look under a microscope, we can see the individual cells, which are full of fat. They're full of these fat droplets. But what most people don't realize is that in obesity, one of the common hallmarks is we see fat accumulating in places where it's not supposed to be. So fat becomes accumulating, shown here in the liver, which leads to fatty liver disease. Fat can accumulate in the heart, which leads to heart disease. It can accumulate muscle and all sorts of other tissues. And when it does so, it causes those tissues to become dysfunctional and lead to disease, okay? And if you look at this image, you may say, that looks kind of familiar. Well, if you've ever taken olive oil and put it in boiling water, you'll see exactly the same thing. As you see these lipids forming, these fats forming droplets, okay? Lipids don't like water, obviously, and they form that. And the same thing happens in the cells in our body. And the reason I'm showing you this is because our lab's very interested in trying to understand why this fat accumulation is actually detrimental, okay? And our studies have revealed that when we break down these droplets, these fats, it actually turns on this beneficial pathway, which I talked about. And the really interesting and cool thing that we found is that when you break down the stored fat, it releases a specific type of fat called monounsaturated fatty acids that are responsible for turning on this pathway. Now, I'm sure most of you have probably heard of this. And the reason you have is because monounsaturated fatty acids are a main component of the Mediterranean diet. And in particular, olive oil is about 80% monounsaturated fatty acids. It is probably the most enriched source of monounsaturated fats in any diet. Okay, not only olive oil, but also avocados and nuts and various other food components in this diet have a lot of monounsaturated fatty acids. And so we're very excited about this finding, and it suggests that it may provide a mechanism, not all the mechanisms, but one way in which the Mediterranean diet and olive oil consumption contributes to some of these health benefits. And so the big picture, which I kind of want to leave you with, is that we've known over the last few decades, as through lots of research and lots of studies, that when we constantly consume more calories than we need, this leads to fat accumulation and obesity. And being in a chronic fed state leads to aging and related diseases. However, when we fast or caloric restrict, we know that this turns on fat breakdown, okay? And what our studies have revealed is this fat breakdown appears to act as a brake on aging and disease. In other words, we can slow the aging process and prevent many of these diseases that occur in aged people. And finally, the last concept I want to leave you with is that when we consume diets in different amounts or different types of fat, those fats become enriched in our bodies, okay? So we kind of mirror what we're eating. And the point I want to make here is when we fast or calorie restrict and break down this fat, the benefits we get from this are in part dictated by our diet. So if we're consuming a diet high in monounsaturated fats, such as olive oil, and then we combine that with fasting or calorie restriction, we think this is going to have a very, very beneficial effect on preventing many of these aging-related diseases. And we're doing these studies in mice and starting studies in humans here very soon to try and specifically answer these very questions. So with that, I hope I gave you some interesting health-related concepts that you can think about and perhaps even apply to your own very life. And I would be more than happy to hear feedback. You can email me at the email address here. My website is here if you want to learn more about our research. Or if you're a tech-savvy person, you want to tweet at me, my Twitter handle is here at DG So again, thank you for this opportunity, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the meeting.
Thank you very much, Professor Mashek. That was very, very informative.